Welcome, viewers, to episode 68 of the ForensicWeek.com show, brought to you by Forensic IQ Incorporated. I'm your host, Tom Moriello, CEO of Forensic IQ and professor at the University of Maryland Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice in College Park, Maryland. Tonight, Polygraph, a truthful discussion about lie detection, the third of a series of episodes on this topic for ForensicWeek.com. Previously, we had episodes 7 and 8 archived in our YouTube channel that established a foundation for the polygraph examination and interview to take the mystique out of the polygraph by presenting it as a process dealing with physiology, psychology, and instrumentation. This evening, with our most distinguished guest, we will discuss the significance of the polygraph as an investigative tool, so you, the viewer, can be clear about its use in the law enforcement and national security communities. Our guest this evening, first, Barry Cushman. Barry is a police detective and polygraph examiner with the Portland, Maine Police Department. He's been with the department for 25 years, and he's been a polygraph examiner for the last 11 years. He's past president of the American Polygraph Association, presently on the APA's board of the American Association of Police Polygraphers, where we both met. Association for Psychological Science, State of Maine Polygraph Association, and this last one, I had to add this, the American Moment. And last but not least, he is the chaplain and pastor of the Wynnum Church of God. Barry, thank you very much. You obviously are a busy guy, and I don't know how much snow you have up there in Maine, but I appreciate you being on the show this evening.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Absolutely. Also, a guest who's been on several times, more times than Ray Simcoe, one of our other guests, Mach Esquire. Mach specializes in litigation and lobbying on matters relating to international transactions, torts and crimes, national security, defamation, and the freedom of information, privacy, our current employees have been wronged by agencies of the United States government or foreign governments, as well as members of Mach teaches DC Bar continuing legal ending security clearances and the basics of filing and litigating freedom of information. Many of Mach's clients are those who have been subjects of polygraph interviews during the clearance process, who may be experiencing difficulties with the results of their examination, are the results of what they may or may not have said during their examination. Mach, thank you again for being here. Appreciate it very much.
Anytime, Tom.
Before we get to begin our discussion, let me just introduce our Forensic Week student crew for this week. Our producer this evening is Jamal Francis, who is a University of Maryland graduate, a sociology major. He's been with us throughout this semester, and this is the first time he's producing for us. For that, Jamal, a graduate student from GW Forensic Science Department, was unable to be with us this evening, but she's been working on the show all week, getting our guests ready to be on the show this evening. We also have Mercedes Quick, another undergraduate intern, who former student of mine, who will be doing some reporting that we call Forensic IQ Update, telling us what's going on in the forensic world around us. Ladies and gentlemen, we are watching ForensicWeek.com, a talk show that features real forensic science by real forensic scientists, educators, law enforcement, and legal professionals who find, collect, and examine forensic evidence in the performance of their duties. Broadcast live on your desktop and mobile devices bi-weekly at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on our YouTube channel, www.forensicweek.com. Those of you who have been watching the show regularly may have noticed that when you went to forensicweek.com. It brought you to a new page that Jamal has worked on, and it gives you a little information, background information about this show, the next one coming, about the crew, etc. And then you just click on the Forensic Week logo, and it brings you right to our YouTube channel. We are a proud member of the Hangout10.com live TV webcast network, which is a series just like this one brought to you live using Google Plus, a social networking service. Jamal, please tell our viewers how to ask questions, make comments, and keep watching.
Thanks, Tom. Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching ForensicWeek.com. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas for future shows, please email us at forensicweek@gmail.com. If you're watching the show live and you have a question for our guest, you can use the comment box below. You can also tweet us at Forensic Week. If you like the episode, please click the subscribe button on YouTube. You can also watch all archive shows 24/7 online at forensicweek.com. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you very much. Let's begin our discussion. And again, we're honored to have Barry and Mach, two people who in the deal with the whole issue of polygraph, sometimes a contentious subject because of the nature of what it is. Barry, let's start with you. You've been a police officer for 25 years, and then about 11 years ago, you decided to be a polygraph examiner. What drew you to go into this area?
Well, I had to have a polygraph test in order to get into the department. Actually, I had to have a couple. I got started there as what's known as a cadet. About a year or so later, became a police officer, so I'd experienced it a couple of times. And then a good friend of mine had been the polygraph examiner up in the Detective Bureau. He had told me a lot about it. I got to see a couple of or actually more than that, many cases utilized in which really moved the investigation along. And my interest just went to and when the opportunity arose, I put in for it.
Well, not only did you put in for it and use it, you also ended up becoming the president of the national organization, the American Polygraph Association. Where do you think the polygraph is today? You know, we started using it in the early 1900s. It's always been contentious, and you know, there's significant groups out there who would hope that we wouldn't use it anymore. It's always called an investigative tool. Explain to our viewers what is meant when we say the polygraph is an investigative tool.
Well, it probably has a number for those who would toss it around, but generally speaking, when you talk about using the polygraph as an investigative tool, it goes back to what I just said a moment ago. There are oftentimes in investigations, you have multiple suspects. You want to be able to narrow something down quickly, focus in on the right path, because the last thing you want to be doing is chasing down resources where they're really not necessary or all that helpful. And polygraph can be utilized in those situations to help discern which way the investigation ought to go. Of course, when you talk about it as an investigative tool, part of that means it's just one piece of the puzzle that's out there that is going to lead you to the truth 100% of the time. Lies by investigators, along with forensic evidence and all those other things that you talk about on your show, as well as case facts and on and on. So it's just one utilized in many major investigations.
Okay, so still today in 2014, and then we're going to move to Mach, but basically the results of a polygraph test, not anything that the subject may have said during the process, but the results themselves and whether the examiner believed, you know, the person was being truthful or deceptive, whatever, that still generally is not presented in a courtroom. Is that correct?
Generally, it's not presented in no. Recently, there have been sort of some changes to that rule. Alaska, for example, just admitted polygraph evidence. Ohio did a couple of years ago. There are, but that's criminal cases where you have to prove the case beyond a reasonable is admissible in cases in some jurisdictions where the standard is lower. For example, I have some friends in some states who testify in child abuse cases rather frequently. In many states throughout the United States, polygraph results can be utilized for probable cause or to establish probable cause for arrest warrants and search like. But I should add, a lot of times polygraph isn't utilized in court. It's resolved ahead of time as a result of polygraph. For example, I've done tests for the prosecutor's office, and all the defendants had defense with polygraphs, and in those situations, when a defense attorney is willing to subject a client to a police test, they usually have pretty good reason to believe that their client is being truthful with them. In those cases, on my end of things, generally those folks are truthful, and I've yet to see a case in which I found somebody truthful when charges either weren't brought or weren't dismissed, and in those cases where somebody has been deceptive, where they haven't used that as oftentimes I've had defense attorneys tell me as a case say. So they tend to get resolved before we get to court.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Mach, tell our viewers how your law practice got involved in clients that have been involved, had taken a polygraph, the results affected, caused them some difficulties that drew them to you.
Right. So I've been practicing law in Washington, D.C. since 1993, and predominantly my practice is within the national security community. And I'm an employment lawyer, so I represent not just those in the IC, the CIA, NSA, FBI, things like that, but law enforcement. So DEA, immigration, ICE, TSA, whoever might use polygraphs. And the distinction given, and one of the things that Barry is doing, there needs to be a distinction between the non-federal and the federal. So I'm handling all federal. And the rules are somewhat different. And I'm not talking about the technicalities of the polygraph, but Barry's governed actually in part, although an exception with law enforcement, by the employee polygraph, or how's it called, the Polygraph Protection Act from 1988, which governs non-federal. The federal government uses it in a little bit different way, and there's nuances as far as how that might work. And so I'll handle cases where, whether it's a security clearance, an employment, it could be an IG investigation, inspector general, could be a criminal investigation within an administrative process like NCIS that people know from television, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, CID within the Army, OSI within the Air Force. And I will prep people for the polygraph. I will address polygraph results. I will, frankly, work with polygraphers. I've represented polygraphers, quite a number of very prominent polygraphers, in fact. I also testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee back in 2001 in the wake of Robert Hansen, the FBI spy, and whether or not he might have been discovered had he been polygraphed, which he never had been. And there's a lot of issues that come up over time dealing with the polygraph, which we'll obviously talk about.
You just mentioned something that you prep people to take the polygraph. Please tell our viewers what you really mean by that, because as you know, there's recently been an indictment in the Department of Justice for somebody who was doing some prepping, and there's two different prepping. So let's talk about your prepping, and then maybe we can go right into that case.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I mean, one of the things that I absolutely agree, and like I said, I represent polygraphers as well when they are having issues within their own agencies. You know, a polygraph, and as Barry was saying, is a tool, an investigative tool, and it has a great deal of utility. And the utility, to some extent, has been developed over the generations polygraph really came into being in its prominence, say, in the 1930s and then to now, because of pop culture. And most people know polygraphs because of how it's used on television shows like Law and Order, or movies like Meet the Parents, or if they listen to Howard Stern, who would always have polygraphers come in and polygraph Pamela Sue Anderson about her sexual positions and what she liked and what she didn't like. And I'll say they view the polygraph as being a truth detection device, which we'll talk about in a little bit in more greater detail. Now, when you believe that, without getting into it being true or not, if you believe the device can discern truth versus fiction, truth versus fact, then you have an incentive to possibly make admissions during the course of the test, usually in the pre-interview or the post-interview. Now, when I prep people for exams, what I'm doing is no different than I would prep any witness for a deposition or trial testimony. And I can tell you for one thing, it is absolutely no countermeasures. I do not advocate the use of countermeasures. I want my clients to steer away from even the perception of countermeasures, and they must be truthful in responding to the questions that are asked by the investigators. In fact, in the federal context, if they lie intentionally to the investigator, it is a criminal offense. It is a felony under 18 U.S. Code Section 1001, which deals with false statements. So I'm prepping individuals on how to deal with interviews, how to be informative, friendly, professional, cooperative, but not necessarily be voluntary and give information that wasn't asked by the polygrapher. If the polygrapher asks the question, the person has to give an answer. But most people, because of the nature of, especially here in the West, are very verbal, are very, especially because you want to be communicative and you want to be cooperative or have the sense of it with these agents, these polygraphers, they gab on and on and on, just like I've talked probably way too much in answering this what could have been a short question. But they say things that they weren't asked by the polygrapher, and that's where they usually get in trouble. Or they don't answer, or they don't understand the question properly, which we can talk about some of the questions that are asked during the exams, and that could come into difficulty as well.
Mark, you and I were speaking at some conference once, and you were giving your presentation first, and I heard you say that you tell your clients that only do you have for example, you did the old thing, excuse me, do you have the time, and if you give them the time, you say that isn't what I asked you if you had the time. Yeah. And that you have that mindset. The problem I believe, and Barry, I want to ask you because I think it's a problem. When questions are being pre-tested, if something outside of the realm of the question comes to their mind, and you say, okay, they're not asking me that, therefore I'm not going to talk about it. If it's a sensitive issue. So every time they hear that question, they're going to think about that. I know that's not what they're asking. Barry, would you not say that could cause for reactions that might be misinterpreted?
If you're asking, be thinking in his or her mind, is that piece of information I'm thinking about relevant to this question? Well, if they're wondering, supposed to be disclosing, and I haven't yet, well, that talk about this is going to be enough to cause problems on polygraph. So what I tell examinees is when I'm asking you a question, if you don't understand it, you're not sure what it means, ask me. If you start to wander into an area that is not the intent of the question, I'll let you know. However, let's not worry about that or go down that road. If for whatever reason you can't psychologically, look at me and say, I'm comfortable moving on, then don't. Listen to people. I might be filling out what I got to pick up from the grocery store on the way home while they talk about whatever it is that they need to talk about. But in these screening contexts, as he's referring to here, sometimes to vent a little bit. I'm not sure of the perhaps if it provided an example, it'd be a little more clear to me. I suspect that there are a whole lot of times when that advice is but I agree with you. As an examiner, I am cautious because if people are wondering, is this something, if I'm asking a question that triggers that, they begin to wonder, am I going to make it through this? And problems.
Yeah, I've just personally seen examples where, you know, I used to tell subjects, you know, you got to drain your mind of any difficulties that are going to get away with you giving a confident response to a question. And when I've had people, you know, react to questions, and then eventually when they finally told me what it was, he says, well, this was it, but I knew that wasn't what you're asking, so I didn't want to discuss it. Well, that became a problem. All right, let's go on because time just goes so quickly. Mach, why don't you bring up the Doug Williams case, kind of give it a little background, and then we'll see, you know, get your opinion. Then we'll ask Barry what his opinion is, because this is major. This is surprising to some extent, but not surprising in another, depending on what camp you're in. So why don't you give the viewers some background on this? And Jamal, if you could put it on the screen too.
And I'm thinking maybe, Tom, it might be helpful because depending on who's listening, the audience, to just give a slight background on the polygraph device and how it's used in the context that I see it. So, because most people obviously believe that there's just the actual test itself, where the person is hooked up to the polygraph machine and attached. Sorry, yeah, okay. That's my non-polygraph examiner context. So, right, the polygraph device is obviously measuring your physiological response, your heart rate, your respiration, your galvanic sweat response, etc. And then the question is, well, if you're registering a significant physiological response, what does that mean?
Who? Mark?
I think we might have just lost Mark, Tom.
No, Mark, are you still there? Okay. Is he still talking?
No, I don't hear him talking.
Okay. Mark, if you can't hear us, are you there? I don't know what happened to him. Barry, let's see if give him a call on it, and then see if we can get him. There he is. Here he comes.
Yeah, I'm back. Am I on?
Yep, you're live.
You're on now. Yeah.
You haven't trouble with your the iMac that you hate just kicked me off for some reason.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, let's go back. Go ahead, Mark.
So I'm not sure where I got cut off. So the device is registering your physiological response. And the question is, what does it mean if you register a physiological response? And some agencies in the federal government will use the terms NDI or DI, no deception indicated, deception indicated. Others, I think more appropriately, will say SPR, significant physiological response, or no physiological response. And because they don't quite know. And this goes to what Barry was talking about, of using the device as an investigative tool. So if there's a significant physiological response, let's explore that further. And the exam is in 3 parts. There's the pre-test, where the examiners will properly go over the questions. So there's no surprise for anyone who has the actual questions, which will usually be what, like 4 to 7 questions, depending on the type of exam, at least for what I'm used to. And then there'll be a post-test. Now, the reason why I talk about prepping is I will try to do what you were discussing. I want to try and make sure the person doesn't register a physiological response. But even more importantly to me, I want to make sure that the person doesn't make an adverse admission that they didn't need to make if the question wasn't asked in a certain way, or at least they're prepared to properly explain it. Because where the polygraph comes up for most cases that I use is in the applicant processing or the periodic screening for security clearances within the intelligence community and most of law enforcement nowadays. And if you just register a physiological response, you are not going to lose your security clearance. You are not going to usually get fired. But if you make an adverse admission, you very well may lose your security clearance or be denied, or you may get fired. So that is a very significant difference. Now, what's happened in the Doug Williams case, Doug has been promoting for a number of years some books on polygraph and advertising on sort of how to beat the polygraph. And there's discussion of countermeasures, and many in the polygraph community have looked upon him as, quite frankly, an enemy. I mean, there are PowerPoint slide presentations online that identify him as a threat, and which is unfortunate because it's just an opposing view on it. And he was being investigated. In fact, his house was raided by the FBI for promoting use of countermeasures. Now, that concerned me a great deal if that was what the investigation was, because what's the concern of the federal government? Now, again, I want to emphasize, I never advocate countermeasures. Absolutely not. Almost the worst thing that you could be accused of is a countermeasure in a polygraph examination, because it's your word against the examiner most of the time. And if the examiner believes you're modifying your breathing, your respiratory rate, or trying to control your heart rate, it's a problem. Now, the problem that comes up a lot of times is when you have individuals who are like marathon runners who have a very, very low heart rate, or they are into yoga or meditation and they can control their breathing when they're not trying to, they're just trying to relax. They're not trying to use countermeasures. It can be construed as that sometimes, and that becomes a problem. So the FBI is investigating Williams for the use of countermeasures. The indictment, however, is completely different. And I'd love to have a conversation with you and Barry about whether countermeasures actually can be detected reliably, or can they work. Because I'll throw out there as a little teaser, Aldrich Ames, the CIA turncoat, who's now in life imprisonment and was spying for the Soviet Union, when he was on the eve of taking his polygraph back in the late 80s as a periodic reinvestigation, he called his Soviet handler and said, I'm scheduled for my polygraph. What should I do? I'm concerned because I haven't had one since I've been spying for you. Can you give me some tips, some tricks, some countermeasures to use? And the handler told him, no, don't worry about it. We don't have any countermeasures. Just relax. So he never used countermeasures, and he registered physiological responses, and he talked his way through it, which is a totally different issue. Now, Williams was indicted, actually, as part of a sting operation, which I have a problem with on that sense. 2 federal law enforcement agencies pretended to be applicants at the Customs Border Protection Agency, at CPB, and they got advice not on countermeasures per the complaint, per the indictment. So I'm only going on what is in the indictment. I don't know anything beyond that. Mm-hmm. Per the indictment, it appears that the phone conversations were recorded, and there's quotes throughout it, and the allegations are that Doug Williams was advocating, instructing, prepping these law enforcement agents pretending to be applicants to lie to the federal investigators, to the polygraphers, so that, for example, they had been, I'm making this part up because I don't remember the specifics, they had told him, well, I got 2 DUIs. And the allegation was a fact like that would be potentially disqualifying, doesn't have to be, that don't say it, don't reveal it. Don't reveal anything that's disqualifying. Don't reveal anything that's adverse. And don't tell me anything that is adverse, that would put me in a position to know that you could be lying. That this is, again, from the allegations in the complaint. So he's been indicted on mail fraud and witness tampering, which is very interesting charges. Mail fraud in the sense that he was getting money through the mail for payment as his retainer, as his charge, his service fee, and witness tampering for allegedly getting these individuals to lie to a non-existent applicant test. Now, my big concern, without getting into the merits of that case, my big concern about that is, while that is nothing I would ever do, I could see a very aggressive prosecutor, a very aggressive agency of the U.S. government, saying that some of what I do as a lawyer in prep for a witness, even though I'm not having them lie, but I'm having them answer a question that has been asked in a certain way and that could be accused of omitting information.
Well,
and how close could that be? Now, it's an extreme case, I admit, but
Mark, I know what you do, and that's I don't think that you come even close to that.
I agree, but you're not an aggressive prosecutor.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Barry. Let me ask Barry to respond on this case. What's your opinion, Barry?
I agree with Mark. I think from some of what I heard him say, Doug Williams or anybody else is certainly free to teach whatever they want, even if they believe that they're problem or the concern that I have, and I think the bigger picture is one of fairness. I'm not the least bit concerned that what Doug Williams is teaching is going to help some liar pass his test. That's not a concern of mine at all. However, there's no such thing as a perfect test anywhere. We could look at the jury system, for example. Mistakes happen, and they're certainly going to happen in the realm of polygraph or any other tests that you've got out there as well. And encouraging people who don't belong in the pipeline, as that indictment alleges, when these investigators came in, they essentially said, look, I'm not qualified for this job. How can I pass this test and fool people? And according to the indictment, as if I'm reading it correctly, he was encouraging them, as Marcus, and the more people that you put in the pipeline that don't belong there, the greater the probability of one of them slipping through the cracks. And there is an issue of fairness there. There's also an issue of cost. The government is spending money and resources polygraphing people who already know the position, at least as this allegation lays out, and they're taking the spot, if there are others that are doing this beyond those investigators, of course, and that must be what the government believes to be proceeding with this. You're keeping the people who belong there out. One thing in response to what it was that Mark said, I at times am called into schools, colleges, and whatnot to tell students who are looking for law enforcement jobs about polygraph and how it is that they can get through that without a problem. I do a lot of what it is that he's discussing with people. You sit them down and say, this is what you should expect. This is what it is that they really want to know about. This is the point of all of that. And of course, we emphasize being truthful. So arming people with knowledge about the process isn't a bad thing. Encouraging people to lie, and I don't think any of us here are for that, is a completely different story, however.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm gonna give the. Hold on, Mark.
Okay.
Hold on. I just want to give you a break for a second so I can call on Mercedes to just give us a highlight of what she's got in the Forensic IQ blog this week. Mercedes, if I could ask you to, there you are. Okay. Just give us a quick rundown on those four articles that you've done abstracts on that are on the blog.
Okay, hi Tom. My first article was new ways to analyze DNA evidence that's under development. they are trying to figure out how to analyze DNA. Which one did I have? Analyze DNA, and they're actually getting an award for 1.7 million to create a new software program. There's another article that I have. It's that VA budget cuts hit forensic labs. They are trying to save money. They're aiming to save 168,000 million in the fiscal year ending in June of this year.
Well, when we hear, new way to analyze DNA, I think the biggest issue here, and I think in this one here, is they're trying to, how can we do it faster, easier, cheaper? Because, it is so expensive and it takes time. There, somebody who gets arrested for a felony in a state that's required to have their DNA integrated into the CODIS database, it may take 3, 4, 5 years before it actually gets in there. So looking for a process that's cheaper and faster is something that they're trying to do. Okay, what about? Let's just run down again because time is going so quickly. I'm gonna jump over a couple. And again, to our viewers, please go to our Forensic IQ blog and look at not only the articles that Mercedes has put there for you, but also there's many others. Mercedes, there's one, fragrances, scent profiles used to characterize suspects. Tell us about that.
Can you hear me, Tom?
Yep.
Okay, so they're trying to use fragrances like body soaps, cologne that people wear to identify suspects. They have different ways to, they have 45 chemical compounds that our body secretes. So they're trying to, like, what is the word I'm looking for? They're trying to, like, pick out certain things so they can actually find out who the suspect is by using, like, DNA through their sweat, and they can actually pick out colognes that are actually popular.
So it's a combination of the chemicals of the cologne together with the biological fluids of the individual that's possibly making some type of an individual characteristic for the fragrance. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because it's interesting. Now that I'm thinking about it, you could have a certain perfume. One person could wear it and it smells a certain way, if someone else wears it and it's a completely different smell. So that might be interesting because, again, another form of trace evidence that might be valuable there. Okay, thank you, Mercedes. We're going to run back to our two guests here. But again, ladies and gentlemen, Mercedes Quick is an undergraduate student, criminal justice and criminology, and she's working with ForensicWeek.com this semester, getting ready to graduate in the spring. Is that correct, Mercedes? Are you graduating in the spring?
No,
I'm graduating in.
No, I'm graduating in December in 2.5 weeks.
2.5 weeks. Oh my God. Okay, very good. So all of you out there who are looking for a smart young lady in this field, she's available in a couple of weeks in December. All right. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get back. We've been dancing around something, and I got to ask it, and I'd be interested to hear what Barry has to say. Is we say that the polygraph is not a lie detector. We've talked about the reactions being just that, physiological reactions. We skirt around what it really is. Is it a lie? Is it what is that physiological reaction? What causes it? The word deception is used, as Mach mentioned, that some agencies, some police departments use the results as deception indicated. Barry, when they say deception indicated, what does that mean in the polygraph world?
Deception indicated results are such that, in all probability, the person is lying to whatever the relevant issue is, whatever the purpose of the test is. It's certainly finding deception indicated. It's taking that a step farther. Talk about measures. Hour here that the views and opinions expressed here are mine.
Right.
Any agencies with which I'm affiliated. First of all, when we talk about that when a person tells a lie, the polygraph is going to register, as I've heard that word used here, a particular response. We know that there is no Pinocchio. There is no like we can't measure intelligence, for example, analyzing a test. That is, we take these particular features that we can look at, that we can observe, that we can measure, and ask, all right, how well do they correlate with what it is that we're trying to figure out? And that is somebody being truthful? Is somebody being deceptive? In a polygraph test, we talk about utilizing it in criminal contexts, oftentimes in screening contexts as well. What we use in the United States, anyway, is known as a comparison question test. And on that test, we'll ask, for example, did you lie in your forms, or whatever the question might be. And then we might, for example, direct a person to lie about how, and that's all set up and explained, because you don't have enough time. But we might direct somebody to lie to a particular question. In so doing, what we see from study after study after study is that when people are truthful to the relevant, or strongly, at least in total, to those comparison questions, and when they're deceptive to the relevant issue, they tend to react more strongly to the relevant issue. So when we're talking about polygraph and what it measures is the differential salience, if you will, or the importance of the question type that's asked. And what we know is that when a person responds more strongly to one question type than another, that the probability is very high that they're either deceptive to that issue or truthful to it. So deception indicated, no deception indicated, it's really just a probability statement, and it means that the evidence that the behavior, the patterns that we see, however it is you want to sort of boil it down, which is oversimplifying it, when all is said and done,
but when
likely truthful, likely deceptive.
all right, but when you're using it in a criminal case, I would say that's fine, because if the person doesn't confess anything, all it does is give you a sense of whether you want to continue to work, continue your investigation with him. And if you can get him to confess, obviously that's always a nice thing. But in the screening environment, if in fact a person reacts and the mindset is that they're being deceptive, there are some agencies or employment agencies who are denying them employment. I get students coming to me all the time in tears. Hey, I'm a criminal justice major. This is what I wanted to be. That's who I had just spent the last 4 years. And I went to a police department, took a polygraph, and they told me I was lying about drugs. And and they come to me, and they have no reason. I'm not going to help them either way. So coming to me and say, look, I've never used drugs in my life before, and now they're telling me that I was deceptive, and therefore I am no longer being considered. I don't know what to say to those people. I don't. I just don't.
In the short time that we have here, I know the American Polygraph Association itself doesn't denying somebody employment or basing a hiring decision based upon physiological responses or the test outcome alone. As it goes back to what we talked about before, with utilizing it as just one piece of the entire app. When it comes to screening exams, though, in these type, what we're looking at are many issues. In a criminal test, we're We want to know, did you rob that the Quickie Mart was robbed? We have reason to believe that the person in front of us potentially had some involvement. We didn't just pick them out of the crowd. However, you're really asking, all right, have you left anything out in net? And we ask a lot of questions. From a scientific perspective and from a polygraph perspective, it's the APA holds a position that it does to run a multiple issue screening test and to conclude from that alone that somebody is being deceptive. Even from a polygraph perspective, we recommend taking more time with the person, interviewing, following up if you can, breaking those issues down a little bit, and using other even polygraph to look at those issues. And I've heard some of those complaints as well. Some places stop short of doing what is, in my opinion, optimal. But again, it's a policy decision, and what some policymakers decide. We know that a screening exam is, and therefore we're going to catch more of the liars. The cost of that is going to be we're going to catch some truthful people as well. And if they're aware of that and they know what, they make a decision and say, hey, look, I'm fine with that because I've got 100 other applicants behind this one who will make it through this without any problem. It really becomes a balancing act of what kind of errors are you willing to tolerate and how far are you willing to go.
Barry,
In my agency,
I have a question for you.
I have
Sorry to cut you off. But I'm curious though, if I'm a naturally nervous or anxious individual, what kind of steps can I take to prevent triggering some type of deception during a polygraph, or what can I do to avoid that? Because there are people that do have anxiety attacks and stuff like that. Is there anything that individual can do in order to avoid, failing a polygraph simply because they're nervous?
I'll tell you what. Well, first of all, nobody's going to fail your shoes.
Barry,
because as I said, you have two different question types that you're looking at. You'd have to be, your nervousness would have to. Tom, are you asking something? Because it's cutting out.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you because you're really cutting out bad for a second. I'm going to ask Mach. Mach gets asked that question by a lot of his clients because some of those clients end up coming to me. What can I do? Mach will send them to me and say, look, this guy is just overly anxious. Mach, what are the kinds of things that you offer? And then we'll get back to Barry.
Sure, no problem. And I want to pick up on some points that were made, and I'll incorporate them all in. I think what Barry said about the APA's policy about not having just a physiological response be the determination for employment is an excellent policy. It's unfortunately not the one many federal government agencies follow, and it goes to the point I agree that he also made earlier about fairness. And I forgot to mention, I litigated against the FBI, Secret Service, and DEA for 6-7 years last decade about their pre-employment polygraph programs. And all sorts of these people who were coming saying, just like you did, Tom, of how they failed the test, failed quotes, but had made no adverse admissions of any consequence and maybe nothing at all. And during the course of the litigation, in fact, then Attorney General John Ashcroft had admitted or acknowledged that as many as, and probably more, 15% of screening tests within the federal government are false positives. That is, the device is registering a physiological response, maybe deception indicated, depending on which agency it was. And the FBI, when I deposed almost a dozen polygraphers in the litigation, and I asked, so if there's a significant physiological response, what does that mean to you, examiner, agent, whoever? And their response was, the person is lying to me, outright. No ifs, ands, or buts. The person is a liar. And if you have yet 15% false positives, you got 15% at least of the population, and I think it's probably as much as 30-40%, who are just physiologically responding for whatever reason, because of thoughts in their mind, like you said earlier, maybe as Jamal said, because they're nervous, maybe because they're anxious, they might be on medication, which most examiners would ask about in the beginning. Maybe they drank too much coffee, whatever it might be. Maybe they just physiologically have a tic or something that causes a problem. Some people can't sit for a long time. They're squirming. I mean, there's lots of things that could set the device off as they're going through the test. Now, the best thing, obviously, I think that any of us can do is we just try and tell these people, you need to calm down, you need to relax as best as we can. My relationship with many of the federal
sorry to cut you
agents.
off, Mark, but I feel like that almost makes people more nervous sometimes. If you say, all right, calm down, relax, now I'm going through my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what exactly am I doing wrong? I thought I was already relaxed, already calm, but it's not working out the way I thought it would.
Well, part of it, Jamal, is exactly what Tom was saying earlier about trying to sort of drain your thoughts and just it's a double-edged sword, because if you relax too much, you could be accused of countermeasures as moderating your breathing. And it's very complicated because the nuances of this. So because I have a relationship with many of the polygraph chiefs in their agencies, if I have someone, as you described, who is going, as I have right now in a particular case, really nervous, really anxious, I think they're going to have a lot of problems with the exam. I'm not concerned about what they're going to say substantively. They are already a law enforcement officer with a high-level security clearance, but they need a higher-level clearance. So I talk to the examiners, and I give them a sense ahead of time, because it's a screening test, so they have no reason to believe that there's an issue anyway, that you need to take sort of extra care with this person. Because many polygraphers, if they're aggressive, they can create physiological responses on their own if they wanted to. And they might be, if you want to be nefarious, it could be intentional, or more likely it could be that the examinee, the student, the applicant, is so nervous that they're hypersensitive to anything the examiner says. I've had examiners yell, let's say, use expletives while they're engaged in the course of the conversation, which the client then says to me, the examiner was yelling and cursing at me. And I heard the tape, many federal agencies tape record their sessions, not all. I heard the tape, and actually they weren't yelling. They raised their voice, but it was in the context of a conversation, and they cursed in the context of like a barroom conversation. It was just normal conversation, but the examinee was so hypersensitive that they perceived it very differently. And a really good examiner is not just a good interrogator and interviewer, but is also someone who's going to be cognizant of that, of which I'm sure Barry and Tom can talk about more, to help the individual get through the exam. Because the last thing they want is someone who's truthful to have problems with the exam.
Yeah, and I'm gonna just tell Jamal, my personal feeling is the more you know and understand the process beforehand, the more calmer you'll be. A lot of the people who are really upset and nervous, they're upset and nervous because they're anticipating something that happens that never happens. Because they asked somebody who had taken a polygraph, what was yours like? Or they went online and started learning all kinds of things from different views. And then by the time they get through with all this knowledge that they sucked from the internet, now they're totally confused, totally upset. They don't know what to expect. So that's why I believe awareness and knowledge up front of what the process is like, what they're going to do, when they're going to do it, can help. Barry, how about you?
Oh, I agree completely. When I do screening tests, and I do a lot of them compared to the criminal tests that I do, I spend a lot of time with people. It's not unusual for me to spend 4 hours or more with some folks. And if they come in, often the background will tell me that some of the information that Mark just referred to, the person's very nervous or whatnot. And you're exactly right. No, they don't really know what to expect. They're unsure of what it is that's going to happen. Talking with them, answering whatever questions that they have, explaining it all to them, going through their answers, make sure that they have the opportunity to talk about nervousness. And I have the luxury of being able, because I've literally had people that get so nervous, they're exhausted and they're out of energy. energy, and I send them home and have them come back. And once they come back, they all tell me the same thing. They feel so much better, so much more relaxed. So it's clearly an information piece that's missing, which is why I'm not opposed to educating people about polygraph up front. People are curious, and it's the whole background process can be invasive and nerve-wracking, and knowing what to expect. The key is time and information.
The problem in the federal system is that very few federal agencies are willing to adopt that view. They want the applicants and examinees to be in the dark, particularly because of what I was talking about earlier, that they want to have the perception that the device is a lie detector and that they can secure admissions from those individuals. When I deposed the then director of the National Center for Credibility Assessment, used to be called DODPI, Defense Department Polygraph Institute, a decade ago, this is the entity that trains all federal polygraphers, and I'm sure has courses for non-federal law enforcement that they can attend to as well. And I received a number of documents in discovery, which I then enabled to go online. And none of them were classified, obviously, because otherwise I wouldn't have had possession of them. But they were documents that predominantly talked about screening tests and specifically identified that, in fact, and this was at least current then, I don't know what it is now, that there were no classified studies and there were basically very few, if any, credible studies that the U.S. government had that proved that screening tests were reliable for as far as the physiological response. Now, specific incident criminal tests, totally different. Lots more research, but I'm talking only specifically for screening tests, and I'm not talking about utility of the device. I'm talking about just the actual reaction of the device. And they were upset. I'll just say they were upset that I got those documents online because he told me he didn't want people to see them.
Okay, let's. The polygraph really hasn't changed that much. We know what it is. We seem to live in a society that wants to have some kind of device that's going to tell us when a person is being truthful or not truthful. And society just is calling for that. What's up? Besides the polygraph, what's new and exciting? Anything coming down the tube in research, Barry, that you know of, or maybe Mach? Of course, we have the computer-assisted voice stress analyzer, which I've never read any study that has said it was valid and reliable, except that it's easy to get people trained in 3 or 4 days. So I wouldn't even put that in the category. Is there anything else that we're looking at that might be more reliable? If we think as a society we need this thing, Barry?
Well, we've heard of a lot of research that's happening. A lot of the new toys are very, very expensive, and any type of new instrumentation that's out there is going to take years to research and look at. Any decently funded research study is going to cost a pretty penny and take some time. So I know that there's always talk. Tell us about what's out there and new. There are always interesting things going on in labs where people study this type of stuff, but I've yet to see anything that's going to replace polygraph in the near future. In polygraph, they're looking at things like automation, allowing the computer to do a whole lot more work, but at the end of the day, it's still polygraph.
Go ahead, Mark.
I was going to say the one area that I have been approached on by reporters and also some companies in the last few years has been brain analysis, which is scary for many different ways. In fact, if it works, is really what is scary. And the notion is that when you, sort of like from a physiological response, when you would say a lie, there would be something within your brain waves that they could see sort of in a PET scan, CAT scan, where a different color would emerge in part of your brain, and that would indicate that, in fact, you were lying. And I'm not sure of the veracity of the studies yet. It's got a lot more work to do, and the U.S. government, I know, is involved with checking that out. But you can imagine sort of how scary that could be with technology that could be applied to people who aren't even aware that they're being tested. Now, I know there was a lot of concern during the second Gulf War from the polygraph associations, at least examiners within the federal system who I know, because the Army was giving young privates, like 19-year-old privates, these handheld so-called polygraph detectors to be used on detainees without much training, as if that was going to be the be-end to end-all. And obviously the real examiners who go through, as I recall, was like a 16-week course, I believe, at the DoD institution, were upset with that. So there's as Barry says, there's a lot of new technology out there, and especially as medicine develops and the scans, and we get a better understanding of the brain, some of which are going to be really scary, and we'll see how they get evolved into the hiring process, federal or non-federal.
I got to tell you, I don't want to live in a society that really believes they have an instrument or a methodology to tell 100% when a person's lying or not lying. That's scary to me, and I hope not only my children but my grandchildren don't live in that kind of society. The polygraph, we've been using it very effectively. On the positive side, the polygraph has been a very effective tool to gather information that we probably would have never got otherwise. And in the criminal world, it really has encouraged people to confess when they maybe never would have done that before. That said, the false positive and all those things we have to live with. But I got to look at the clock, and the time is truly gone out. And this is a subject that I know we could go on and on about. It was really hard to get. I wanted to get a number of people on the show tonight, and it was difficult to do that. Mach, I asked him the first time I asked him. He said, "I'll be there. It's on my calendar. I appreciate it." Barry, was a person I just talked to in the last week or so. I said, "Barry, I really need somebody of your stature in the community in polygraph to come on the show so we can have a good discussion." And I think we have, and I really appreciate that. So, Barry, I hope it's not too cold up there. How much snow do you got outside your door, Barry?
Oh, it's only about an inch.
Oh, really? Oh, my God.
Yeah.
We think of Maine and we think of all these mounds of snow, so that's good. I want to thank both of you. Mach, again, thank you very much. Maybe we can do this soon again and talk more about it. It's a subject that you could just spend hours and hours. I would say to our viewers who are preparing to take a polygraph, there's a lot of good information out there. In fact, if you go to Forensic IQ, my website, under polygraph consultation, there's several documents and a video that kind of gives you a big picture of what to expect in the screening. Not the criminal. If you're being called in to take a polygraph because you're suspect to a crime, I can't help you. But when it comes to a screening environment, we do the best we can to try to get you to a point where you can get through it, because, in most cases, you got to get through it. And Mach spends a good deal of his career in his firm helping people get through that, and he's been very successful in doing that, and I appreciate that. Gentlemen, I just got to tell you a little bit about our next show if you're interested. Barry, you probably never heard of this. On December 18th is our next show on a Thursday evening. We will have a forensic podiatrist, yes, a foot doctor, a forensic podiatrist. His name is Dr. Wesley Vernon. He's from England, and he's going to talk to us about how that science can be used to examine the insides of shoes, evaluating the walking gait of an individual if you're looking at surveillance photographs and you can't see the person's face or whatever, their gait, the way they walk based on the shape of their feet. So we're going to learn a lot about forensic podiatry. I didn't even know it existed till I had the president of the International Association of Identification on. So that's on the 18th. Now, viewers, the show is not going to be at 7 in the evening Eastern Standard Time like it normally is because Dr. Vernon is in England, and we're going to probably do the show closer to noontime. But if you just go to www.forensicweek.com in the next week or so, we will identify exactly the time the show will be live. But like all shows we do, like this one this evening, it'll be archived on our YouTube channel for all of you to listen at your leisure. So Barry Cushman and Mark Zaid, thank you very much for your time and being on our show this evening. Jamal, thank you so much. This is the first time Jamal produced the show, and I really appreciate that. Mercedes, we'll see you next week. Next week's the last week of the semester, so come by the lab and we'll chat. And good luck to you in the oncoming years in your career. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been looking at forensicweek.com. Excuse me. You've been looking at forensicweek.com, being brought to you through the cooperation of the Hangout10.com live TV network. We recommend that you go to the Hangout10.com website and see the schedule of other shows like this one available for you to learn and be entertained. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this evening, and we will see you next time on forensicweek.com. Thank you. I'm your host, Tom Moriello, coming to you from Laurel, Maryland, CEO of Forensic IQ Incorporated and professor at the University of Maryland, Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice and College Park. Our mission is to present real forensic-related content by real forensic professionals, and we go worldwide to find those professionals. Our goal is to broadcast topics of interest valued by an international viewership. Our vision: well-informed practitioners, mentored students, and enlightened jury pools.